today, and I thank you for your patience. To the Color Guard and to the Sons of Confederate Veterans, I know it must be hot because I'm burning up. But I want to read a couple of articles from the local newspapers. Before I do that, I said here we are almost 150 years removed from the date of Lieutenant Pettigrew's death, and so we appreciate the time that you're giving us to. They're thoughtful remarks. There's a lot of remarks, but we want to go back and set the record straight and hear the words of Lieutenant Pettigrew and those that were around him during his death. Excuse me, from the Washington Star. The headline was Burial of a Rebel Officer. We would probably prefer Confederate, but another error and omission by the local Washington newspapers. The funeral of Major George W. Pettigrew, who was wounded at Fredericksburg and taken prisoner, took place from Masonic Hall this afternoon and was attended by a large number of Masons who followed his remains to the Congressional Cemetery and was buried in the lot belonging to the Grand Lodge. He was a relative of a distinguished lawyer of that name of Charleston, South Carolina. In the Battle of Fredericksburg, he was wounded in the knee. He was brought to this city and taken to the Patent Office Hospital on Wednesday last, but steadily refused to allow his wound to be dressed until all of the wounded who had come up at the same time had been attended to, and when his case came, it was found that mortification had taken place, which resulted in his death Monday night. On Sunday, finding that there was no hope of his recovery, he made himself known as a Mason to the surgeon in charge, who asked that in fact should be made known to some of the local Masons or to some of the Masons here in Washington. Grandmaster Stansburg was at once informed and hastened to his bedside. A will was drawn leaving his property to his mother, wife, and children, about whom he seemed to be mostly concerned. He also requested that the Masonic fraternities would take charge of his body and it would be buried with the usual honors. After his death, which took place on Monday night, his remains were placed in a handsome mahogany casket and laid in state at Masonic Hall, and this afternoon services of the Episcopal Church, of which he was a member, was conducted by Reverend Dr. McCurdy of Kentucky. The Masonic services at the grave were conducted by Grandmaster and Lecturer E.L. Stevens. And then from another Washington paper, and this is in 1911, recounted events by Jacob Dart, who was in his unit. I'm going to not read it exactly because I think the order of sequence of this may make more sense if I start at the bottom. Some years ago, when I was on my way to Washington, when near Hamilton's Crossing, an accident occurred to the engine. The conductor said it would require an hour for repairs. It was late in the evening. The sun was sinking behind the western hills. I knew where I saw him last, the sword grasped in his hand. You can imagine the irony of some 50 years later, the train breaks down in the very spot that Lieutenant Pettigrew was wounded, and he recognizes this. There was the same ditch, but the plowshare had been there. Fields of grain were waving in the autumn winds. A stray sunbeam rested for a moment, then faded away. In the gathering twilight, all was so calm, so still, so peaceful. No sound was heard, save the distinct song of the reapers gathering the golden harvest. The shrill whistle of the engine recalled me, and night closed as I went. What he had said in the earlier part of the article, the death of Major Pettigrew was caused by the mortification of a wound which resulted from his persistent refusal to have his wounds dressed until after all of our wounded men were attended to, not his comrades in grave, but his late foes upon the field of battle. Let song and story tell of Leonidas and his Spartan band. Let poets sing of the charge of the Light Brigade. Let Phillips in the House of Lords, speaking of Napoleon's death, say, he was the greatest man that in the annals of the world ever rose, reigned, or fell. Let marble shafts rear high their heads to commemorate the heroism of men. Let golden medals be pinned upon their breast for noble deeds. But here was a Brunswick boy seeking no fame or reward, forgetting mother, wife, and prattling babes, reaching out in the broad field of suffering humanity, though they were his foes. With the charity extended beyond the grave, knowing that every hour his chances of life were growing less and less, saying, don't mind me or my sufferings, help the other sufferers. They are no longer foes, but belong to that great world of humanity and died that others might live. So my final remarks will be, it took a lot of duty, honor, and most importantly, courage. And a man of 43 almost, here's a man half my age who had more courage than I think I would to fight in these battles and to have the kind of fortitude and courage and duty to say, don't treat me until all the other men who were wounded here, both friend and foe, were treated. So I would like to commemorate to Lieutenant Pettigrew my esteemed thoughts and the great fortune, as fate would have it, that he had 2 offspring before he passed away, and the reason we're all here today. So thank you very much. Attention, color guard.
About 30 seconds.
Shoulder, arms. Present, arms. Now, John, if you and Richard would like to